Millions of despairing men, women, and little children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people.
You cannot shake hands with a clenched fist.
Produced by a nuclear exchange would be carried by wind and water and soil and seed to the far corners of the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
We're not saying that planet Earth is coming to an end. We're saying that planet Earth is about to be refurbished, spaded under, and have another chance to serve as a garden for another civilization.
Most of the people in here are just your reflections. They're your mistakes.
1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms.
1 million of the planet's 8 million species are threatened.
You are what you repeatedly do. Therefore, excellence ought to be a habit, not an act.
Your lives and the credibility of the United Nations is at stake.
Epstein didn't kill himself.
The reason this is such an interesting time is not only because we're on the threshold of the end of this civilization.
They're trying to take you out with bullshit.
The experience of the past 2 years has proven beyond doubt that no nation can appease the Nazis.
To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish.
In the language of the U.S. Department of Defense, these are unidentified aerial phenomena.
Roswell's a very interesting place with a lot of people that would like to know what's going on.
There is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone.
This is the Garden of Doom.
Welcome everyone into Garden of Doom. This week we're welcoming in one of our repeat revisiting guests and visitors. I like to try and trick her into being called a co-host. She keeps declining that and swatting me away like a mosquito that I am. Cee the Superior. How are you, Cee?
Hello, everyone. I'm doing well. I'm happy to be back here to talk some more, mythical creatures with you.
Mythical?
Thanks for inviting me back.
Mythical, that's our first fight. I object. So before we get started on the show, I first want to let the audience, I don't know if I've talked about this before on this show. I certainly have on Hammerlock Hangover and certainly on UPR. So for those of you who don't know, UPR is Unpopular Review. And I was a cast member of that like 3 years ago. And then recently I rejoined probably about 3 months ago. And Cee is also a cast member of the Unpopular Review family. However, she's on the entertainment side. I'm on the wrestling side. And while the twain shall meet, not for me. So I don't think I certainly haven't worked at all with Cee on UPR, Unpopular Review, during the last 3 months, except for an award show where she was the glamorous co-hostess, all dressed up and looking beautiful, and had to be with my Hammerlock Hangover, one of the co-hosts, Big Daddy Cool Steve Pena, who was dressed like a schlub except for his fancy fedora, which he thinks makes him look cool. So aside from that, our work together is mostly here, and actually we both have some loose affiliation with the Space Corps Foundation. Hers is a little bit looser than mine, but really not by much. But we're friends, and what I'm trying to build to here is that Cee came to my wedding, as did Steve and bad guy Jack Ron Jackson from Unpopular Review, and joined us recently on Hammerlock Hangover. So she's a real life friend, and she made a trip. It's not like she lives down the street. So and those guys, they came all the way up from New York. Yeah. And Steve went from like upstate New York, picked up Ron in one of the boroughs, and then came down. So he went considerably out of his way. So thank you to those folks. But the people who are listening to this, I mean, I hope they like getting to know me and why you're on so much, and this, that, and the other.
Backstory.
Yeah.
Or origin story, if you will, of us getting to know each other.
Exactly. So, I always like to say the Garden of Doom really isn't about me, but since I'm the only consistent thing with it, I mean, I guess if people are listening to the show and they have been for 4 years or even 4 months or whatever, I mean, the only consistent thing is me. So I have to be some part of it. I mean, it can't just be for the content, though I will always say that you don't need to like me. You just need to like the content or trust me to, more often than not find something that's interesting for you. And I hold that. But, I don't even introduce myself on the show, which is sort of like failure of broadcasting 101. Like you're supposed to start with I don't say this is Jeff Lippman. I don't even say this is Jeff. I mean, I just leave.
We can start changing that. We can change that starting today. Introduce yourself again.
Yeah, I just did. So but today we're going to talk about werewolves. And Cee is here for us for werewolves because she's done a couple of these historic journey shows with us before. We did a show on vampires in literature, which was a lot of history, and then we did vampires sort of writ large, sort of outside of just literature. And I would definitely advise you, if you're interested in those subjects, to pay attention. But if you're not all that interested in vampires, but you are tickled by werewolves, listen to the second show on vampires, where we were both on it with the history of vampires, because a whole lot of it, what are being called vampires or part of vampire lore now, really could be called witch, shapeshifter, revenant, zombie, or werewolf. I mean, those things, there's so many similar traits and overlapping. I think in some cases it's impossible to distinguish them. And I don't think ancient peoples were trying to distinguish them. But these are sort of universally similar. But the werewolf seems to exist universally. Even where there's other were creatures, there's often a werewolf. Some places where there's not other were creatures, there's something that sort of occupies the same place in the local ecology, in nature. And that's certainly not an accident. But werewolves go way back in literature than your vampire. I mean, arguably, or what people consider to be the first piece of literature, has a werewolf in it. I would suggest possibly two, but I seem to be alone in that. But anyway, I've been going on a while. So, Cee, what are your takes on this?
So, the werewolf, it is, I would say, or most people would say, it's the most famous of all of the shapeshifters, right? When you think of a shapeshifter, you automatically think of a werewolf, right? Person who changes into, part man, part wolf. But as you mentioned, there are culturally other were animals. So, we have like the were panthers that are mentioned in the Suki Stackhouse books. Mm-hmm. We have were hyenas. I think they're like from Somalia. There's all these different were animals that I thought was cool. But when it comes specifically to the werewolf, as you mentioned, it's been around for thousands of years, at least in writing. It was in, like you said, the Epic of Gilgamesh. And it was, Ishtar, the goddess of love and war. She's... Oh,
Inanna. Who turns into Ishtar later, or vice versa. Inanna must be older than Ishtar, yeah.
So she was the one who originally turned the first werewolf. It was like an ex-lover of hers, and she was kind of gloating over the fact that she turned this ex-lover into a wolf, right? So that's kind of, this was written way back in like 2000 BC, like forever ago, many, many years before the first vampire was written about. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, sure is.
There are some scholars that say that it's actually a were-tiger versus a werewolf that was mentioned in the Epic of Gilgamesh. But either way, it's still some sort of half animal, half human, or previously human turned into an animal. Because we notice as time goes on, werewolves became hybrids of two things, of a human and a man, because previously the first couple mentions of werewolves in history have been when a human is turned completely into a wolf, right? And it looks just like a wolf. You wouldn't be able to differentiate it between a regular wolf in the woods. But as history moved forward, we started to reimagine werewolves into hybrids. You have human-like features, werewolf-like features combined to make the werewolf that we know today, like horror and stuff like that. So I think it's an interesting transition to see how things go as time moves on. But yeah, a lot of the history of werewolves come from ancient tales. They come from mythology. They come from even Greek mythology. There is what was that? Is it Lycan?
Yeah, Lycion.
Lycion, King Lycion. He was turned into a wolf by Zeus after he sacrificed one of his own sons to feed to the god. Like, it was the great father that he was.
Right. It was like a reverse Arya Stark to the Tully family, or the Tarleys of the river bridge, or whatever that their land was called. Yeah, no, there's definitely a lot of that, and it's endlessly fascinating. So, I mean, the one thing I think both of us found is that there's no single origin of the wolf, and the wolf, you know, there's lots of reasons why people cite. I mean, I believe that part of the reason is that there is some human memory of dire wolves existing, which were just bigger wolves. Like the cave bear and like the saber-toothed cat. They were just bigger. Yeah, exactly. And I don't know when the dire wolves finally went extinct. I don't know if it was before, the younger Dryas, or it was after, or some survived. I don't see any reason why, if humans were able to survive that, why some dire wolves wouldn't. But whatever it is, our human collective memory, while some of it fades, a lot of it survives. And I've got lots of theories on certain things that survive, but there's some things that we know survive very long, like the Seven Sisters, the Pleiades. And I've talked about this endlessly on the show, so I'm not going to do it again. But the wolves and humans have a relationship that goes back tens of thousands, possibly more than 100,000 years. Probably much longer than that as competitors. With a little bit of synergism. I mean, I imagine that wolves probably scavenged from human kills. I imagine that humans may have scavenged or chased away wolves occasionally from their kills as well. Sort of like hyenas and lions do. Not friendly, but, one benefits, the other doesn't. And I guess the difference would be whether or not there were, 12 wolves there versus 6 men, or there were 4 wolves there versus 20 men there, or whatever the case might be. Or women. We've been learning more and more that women were actually actively part of the hunting and other, the hunting and the gathering part of the hunter-gatherers. Then there's also the relationship where it became the wolves sort of figured out that this was a good relationship for them, or the humans did. I'm not sure which. There's a lot of argument that wolves might have domesticated men more than men domesticated. And when I say men, I mean humans. I don't mean people with a penis. I'm just saying it writ large. It's 2024. You have to be very careful here. I begrudgingly, in my Al Bundy way, I'm realizing this. Or whether men domesticated wolves. So, listen, I don't know if this is like the modern way that we try to turn all the bad guys into understandable, not good guys in their own way, that basically started with, Tony Soprano and Wicked, where we made the witch the sympathetic victim. But I don't know. I mean, it'll be interesting to find. But anyway, the wolves at some point, some wolves actually started living hand in hand with humans, and they, all dogs, every single dog that's out there now is a descendant of a type of Eurasian wolf that is no longer, it's extinct now. I'm not saying the other wolves weren't entered into the mix, that there weren't hybrids, that those Eurasian wolves didn't interbreed as well, and that some dogs haven't bred from wolves since, or with wolves since. They certainly have been. And, we've bred ridiculous looking animals like chihuahuas and dachshunds and whatever. And, none of them look anything like a wolf, just somehow we did it, because dogs can breed with each other, seemingly endlessly, almost as if they're like, which is also sort of a Homo sapien trait. I mean, we divide ourselves falsely into races. There's only one human race. We can all interbreed. I mean, I used to joke that one day everyone's going to look like The Rock and Jennifer Lopez. But pick any other human on Earth, and if they're willing to breed with you, you can breed with them. You can have a successsul child. A lion and a tiger cannot, but a wolf and a dog can. I don't know about a wolf and a hyena, so I don't know, but wolves and foxes can, like foxes and jackals can. It's like the canines. They're very flexible that way. I mean, your house cat can't breed with a puma. It's like even beyond that. So anyway, so all wolves came from this Eurasian wolf, all dogs rather, and that's sort of where a lot of we all learned about the Fertile Crescent in school, but I've in my studies through Garden of Doom and otherwise have decided that there's more of a fertile delta, and it seems like the people who are actually study this stuff agree. Of course, they came to the same conclusion well before I did. I just got there independently or sometimes with their help, but it's sort of like starts at the Nile, and goes to the Indus Valley, and it sort of goes up into, where the Caspian and the Black Sea is, and, just, I don't know, put the end of the triangle point, the top point of the pyramid, sort of in, South Central, Russia, where Asia and Europe meet. And that's sort of where we go. Anyway, so we've got humans and wolves living in harmony, humans and wolf dogs living in harmony, possibly the dogs even guarding against wolves to an extent. Everyone knows that a dog can sense another animal, vibrations and smell them way before we can. They'll start barking and get restless, and you can go on guard. You can light the light the torches and get your bows and arrows and spears out ready and stuff like that. So I feel like I've been going on a little bit, and I've got a guest.
We're talking about how, dogs were domesticated from wolves, and how they were even used as protection against other wolves, and how that fear of werewolves and just creatures and the unknown in general, people use animals in order to protect them from that. So there's been a lot of sightings, like you'll hear about werewolf sightings back in the day. People are like going through the woods, hiking, and they'll say, either Bigfoot, werewolf, those are like the big two when you have people in the woods and they're scared, and they see what they see. But I think it's interesting how there is that otherness. There's that otherness when it comes to when we as humans, when we are somewhere unknown, when we're in the dark, we create these stories. And I think it's interesting how it spreads. Some of it's werewolves, some of it's vampires, some of it's, I guess in Native American mythology, or in Navajo culture specifically, they have the skinwalkers, right? Mm-hmm. And unlike with the werewolves that we know of today, I think there was this distinction where skinwalkers aren't necessarily cursed with werewolfism or anything like that. They are specifically people who choose this lifestyle, people who are less than savory, people who are the wicked of that group. They become skinwalkers, and how they become that is they choose it, and you have to know another existing skinwalker, and in order to be accepted and become a skinwalker as well, you would have to kill someone close to you, something like a family member, a brother or something like that. So that's how it kind of differentiates from werewolves that we know today. Because usually when you hear about a werewolf, it's because, at least in literature, it's because they were bitten by a werewolf, right? Or, something along those lines. So, I find it interesting how these stories kind of shift over time. And even in Egypt, there is, what's that goddess name who turns into a lioness? I think I have her.
It's Sekhmet.
Yes. So she's kind of not a werewolf, but a were animal, if you will.
Right. Seth's daughter, his vengeance.
Yeah. And she was so bloodthirsty that he had to trick her and turn the water red, and she thought it was blood. And that kind of leads us to how werewolfism and Lycanism is kind of been linked over time to mental illness.
Egypt is interesting, though, as a footnote, which has almost nothing to do with this, but Egypt depended on floods for its economy. The Nile flooding over was part of life. That was, if the Nile did not flood over, they were in trouble. That's how they fertilized, their land, and that's how they produced more food than they had people, which was useful for things like having a standing army, like people like just drilling, which made them unique. So their equivalent of flood myth is Setmath setting the land on fire, which is really, really interesting, because it's sort of, nobody knows when these myths took place, so everyone can extrapolate. But a lot of people feel that based on the timing of it and other references, that their version of the flood myth, the fire flood, took place around the same time as other flood myths did, which sort of goes to, the theories of the Great Cataclysm, where, you have these comets that turned into meteorites that landed over the earth and caused a lot of, volcanism and volcanoes and earthquakes and things like that, which would present itself as fire in lots of places, versus floods and others. But that is a complete side note and aside. I cover that in other shows as well. But for those who don't listen to the show regularly, welcome to Garden. Almost all the shows are evergreen. Go back and enjoy.
Yes, please do. But yeah, speaking of that Egyptian goddess and how she was so bloodthirsty and mad, and it was almost like a mental illness. It was like she was just so crazed, right? And I think that's how, or at least partially, how werewolfism is also linked to mental illness, and how these people who are burdened or cursed with this werewolfism, they a lot of the times it's framed as, are they really werewolves, or are they, insane, right? Which one of the two is it? I know that there are clinical terms for people who believe that they're werewolves to this day, right? So it's like clinical lycanthropy or clinical lycanism or something like that.
Yep, you're exactly right.
Yeah, and people still have this thing where they think that they're turning into wolves. So it makes you wonder, like, our ancestors, is this where it comes from? Did they actually see these things, or did they, or speaking with people who are experiencing that mental illness, it's like, okay, which one is it, I think that's interesting.
It certainly is. And both of us looked at some academic works on this and histories, and, individually tried to coalesce it. So I don't know if we're going to follow the same order or not, which is fine. We don't have to. But there's seems to, as you said, people don wolfskins during hunts and rituals. And you said some of them were crazed. They were, but others, they were like the religious leaders as well. And they weren't always good and evil. And other times it was just to make one braver in battle. And this is not unique to wolves. I mean, I don't know if it's true, but I've done some brief studies on Native Americans, First Nations period. And aside from all the tribes and the clans, or aside from all the tribes, there's 4 clans. There's like the Bear Clan, the Eagle Clan, the Buck Clan, or Deer. And there's one other. I can't remember what it is. But whatever tribe you're in, you'll always find members of one of those 4 clans in that tribe. And so you must be granted hospitality by your clan member, even if your tribes are enemies of each other. Which, again, I don't know if this is one of those, I mean, I want to say urban myth, but it's obviously it's the opposite of an urban myth, but if it's just one of the romantic myths, or if that's something that's true. But it makes sense because there were similar things in sort of Siberia and Central Asia and Eurasia, and that's where most of our First Nations people came from. So why wouldn't that be the same? I mean, famously, Genghis Khan was of the Wolf clan. So anyway, there's that. But people think about in Mesoamerica, put jaguar pelts on top of their bodies when going to war. They were called jaguar knights. Berserkers in Norse and Germanic. I mean, so this is not relegated to, like ancient peoples or Native Americans, or this is worldwide. The tribes in Africa put, different, hyena and lion and leopard skins, and with the fangs and whatever. And I don't know that it's much different now than people, you put on different costumes. Like even people like who wear sunglasses at night, they're trying to portray some level of bravado, some type of bravery. So anyways, there was that. So there was the wolf basically comes represented three types of things to ancient peoples. When I say ancient at this point, I'm sort of going from like probably 5,000 years ago to 1,000 years ago, which is a wide range. And I might be wrong about the bookmarks there, or the bookends. One is sort of a patron of warriors. One is greedy, because they are scavengers. I mean, most animals are smart. They're going to conserve energy, because so whatever the least amount of calories needed to get food is what they're going to do. If they don't have to form a whole pack and hunt, an elk, they're not going to, if they can just scavenge the kill that the humans made. And in other cases, the devil itself, or some sort of evil demon. People speculate that it's, wolves wildly appeared, all the time, that humans and wolves intermingled, or at least occupied the same space, hunted the same prey. They had a similar kind of lifestyle, if that can be believed, especially before settlements. But it is sort of the symbol of the epitome of the animal other. But I also think that it's also the epitome of the animal inside, which I think is sort of what we both touched on independently in this. But the academics have divided werewolves into three different types. And I think you and me both touched on it, maybe all three, but I think it's probably good to put them into definitions because they seemed obvious after hearing it, but I don't think I ever tried to categorize it this way before. I don't know that it actually even occurred to me, which is not unusual. I mean, everyone who remembers taking Psych 101 in college, I was going to go, that's just common sense, but somebody put a definition to it. Well, and that's a lot of times what makes somebody, the difference between their historic figure or not is actually, putting a term to common sense. So anyway, the three types. One is the victim, and that is the innocent human who's cursed to become a werewolf, but they maintain their human reason. So there's sort of this struggle or tragic, maybe it's not even a conflict, they have no control over it, but it's some sort of tragedy, but they are innocent. Then there's the damned, the violent or sinful humans who are punished, and their body and soul both becomes the beast. And then we have the warrior, where the spirit of the wolf guides the war and the hunting prowess of the individual or individuals. And none of these are mutually exclusive, as near as I can tell, in particular cultures. I mean, they seem to all coexist if you look hard enough. So the oldest piece of literature that generally is agreed upon that we currently, 2024, have discovered is the Epic of Gilgamesh. There's other writing that people have found that's older, some of which has not yet been translated. Some of it is just sort of like inventory lists and trade lists and saying how much, barley is here and how much wheat is in this barrel, and really boring things, arrangements for marriages, stuff like that, basically contracts, which of course, I mean, it's boring to you. It's not boring to me. That's very exciting. that validates the eternal need of my profession. But as you pointed out, in Gilgamesh, you have your victim werewolf, where Inanna turns a shepherd into a wolf, which, you know, as you said, you know, one of her ex-lovers, which, I mean, Inanna, you know, and people like a shepherd. Okay. When we think about a shepherd now, you're thinking about, like, you know, the people in the mountains of Afghanistan or some, you know, poor country that's like a humble profession, and cars are beeping and waiting for their flock to go, and goats with bells on their. No, I mean, sheep and goats were wealth, just like cattle became wealth. And frankly, does anyone really know a poor rancher? You know, it really hasn't changed much. I mean, watch Yellowstone. But shepherds were wealth. I mean, what was Job, you know, rewarded with? Like, what was it, triple his flock or something like that? So there's that. There's
he wasn't a small Joe. He had some money, and she still turned him into a wolf.
Right, and one of the big turning points in the Epic of Gilgamesh is that Gilgamesh rebuked Inanna. He's like, nah, I don't think I don't want to be with the. And by the way, those who don't know Inanna, obviously I haven't listened to the show much, but most people think that Inanna is the origin sort of drift that became that she was so popular in other names, whether it's Ishtar or Astarte, or Isis, that she became Aphrodite, that the Greeks had to import her into their religion, into their mythology. And if you know the origin of Aphrodite, it's really, really strange. It's not the same as any of the other Olympians. And that's one of the reasons that people point to it. But anyway, the point is, Inanna was probably really hot, like the goddess of love kind of hot. And Gilgamesh is rebuking her. Now, Gilgamesh was not just a man. He was 2/3 divine himself, and the other third was magic. So, you know, I don't really know the difference there, but, you know, he was no regular guy, but he rebuked her. But I think that everybody ignores a second possible werewolf or werewolf adjacent creature in Enkidu. Enkidu was a beast man. He was a jungle man, a wild man running through the jungle that the gods actually created at Gilgamesh's subjects' behest to challenge Gilgamesh to either kill him or teach him humility. But Enkidu's like, I'd rather hang around in the jungle and drink water on my, you know, 4 hinds, and like they sent a prostitute to him to seduce him, who they basically had sex for 7 days. You know,
So with him, right? This is the question. Was he like a werewolf, or was he like just a beast, kind of like Tarzan, where he was raised by animals and he was just giving more into his, you know, animal-like instincts, like those what was the story behind Rome? It was like 2 brothers who created Rome, and they were raised, or
Romulus and Remus.
Yeah, maybe that was raised by a wolf mother. So I was like, is he really?
I don't know.
Or is he a beast man because he was, you know, in the woods?
Well, I mean, he was described as very hairy, and he would run on all 4s. I don't think he was like a Tarzan, because he was strong enough to basically wrestle with Gilgamesh for a long, long time until they both got exhausted. Gilgamesh ultimately won, but it was enough to get. It was, you know, I always picture it as like the first time the Thing and the Hulk fought in Marvel Comics. The Hulk won, but, you know, he knew not to take the Thing lightly. And going back to my geekdom, I always picture Enkidu as the way they portray Sasquatch in the Alpha Flight comics and the X-Men comics. So, you know, I don't know if he's really a werewolf, but I think he was enough of a beast. I think he's less Tarzan, or if he's Tarzan, he's like, you know, really jacked up magical Tarzan. But, you know, it's enough werewolf adjacent anyway. Just more. Yeah, so I'm gonna opine for my own scholarly dissertation for my well-delayed PhD that we have 2 examples of the wolf. One who was actually just transformed into a wolf and sent along running, became a regular wolf and ran away with the pack. And by the way, folks, the climates were very different then. And yes, you had wolves and lions and tigers and bears and hippos and elephants ranging in all different parts of the world. You know, it wasn't just all in sub-Saharan Africa as it is now. For a lot of the animals that we think of, or zoos. But I think Enkidu was the one that was more cursed, but was created pure, but had the battle of beast and man within him. And man won out from the love of a woman and then the love of a man. Now, a lot of people now say that Gilgamesh and Enkidu were gay lovers. I don't know if that's the case. I don't care if that's the case. I don't really think it is. I don't think that was really part of the story. I just think it was like they were heroic duel. It's like, I'm sure in 1,000 years, people will say that Frodo and Samwise, were gay too. Who knows? Maybe they were. I really don't care. But a lot of, it's only recently that men expressing their filial love for each other sort of became, stigmatized. I mean, the Knights of the Round Table all loved each other. It was the kings say, I want my people to love me. I mean, it's, it didn't all mean physical. Anyway, that's not necessarily tied to the werewolf thing. It's just my crazy Enkidu theory, which,
I find it interesting that when it comes to like werewolves and Enkidu and all of these other ones, even back to those two brothers that I mentioned from Rome, they ended up wanting to populate Rome by bringing in all of these women. So they would have this festival of, days of intercourse with women. And I'm like thinking, there has been this long association with werewolves and beasts and, intercourse and things like that. And it made me wonder why vampires are so closely associated with, sexiness and stuff like that when it might be the werewolf. And it's almost more recently in the literature specifically that the whole sexy werewolf trope is kind of coming back into fashion, right?
Well, you're a woman, right? I mean,
yes.
Don't women like bad boys?
Yes, yes, we do, specifically in our books, right?
Right. So what's the difference?
I guess there isn't much of a difference. But I think it's interesting that, apparently back in the day, werewolves were highly sexual, right? Mm-hmm. And then it came to this period that, they weren't as sexual or seen as sexual or sexy. They were seen as, scary and then the damned and crazy. And you don't want to be anything around a werewolf. And in books now, you can't even pick up a book with a werewolf without it being like, some sort of dark romance. So it's like it's all going, full circle. We're getting back to where werewolves are sexy again, and I like it.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's almost like Justin Timberlake brought sexy back. It's somebody brought. Who wrote the Twilight series?
Stephanie Meyer.
Okay, well, I guess she brought sexiness back for werewolves.
Yeah, I think she might be credited with that for sure.
I would think so. So going to the Greek and the Romans, you have an example of the damned, and this is in Agriopas', I hope I pronounced that right, Agripiosis, I don't know, Agriopas' Olympionics is the name of the book, where you have people being punished for eating human entrails. So again, cannibalism. Wolves do, by the way, there's a lot of cannibalism linked to the wolf curse. It's always sort of been taboo, but, and wolves do eat the remains of their own without consequence. They have a much tougher digestive system than we do. One of the reasons that cannibalism is taboo in humanity, not just because we're so modern, but sort of always, is because it actually makes us sick. Like, our digestive system isn't built to digest our own biomes. If that's
specifically the brain, I heard, right?
Ooh, I don't know specifically the brain, but that's exciting.
Yeah, specifically the brain. There are cultures that would go around eating as a form of mourning. They would eat their dead loved one's brain, and they kept getting sick and sick, and apparently it's uncurable.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's really interesting. The things you learn, man. I said this is very interesting, intriguing. Specifically the brain.
Yeah.
The human brain.
So once I was at this Eastern European restaurant, and one of the dishes was cow brain.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it's gross. It's gross to think about. It tastes gross. I don't know how people eat it. I mean, I understand if you're starving and you don't have much choice, you eat everything you can to live.
Yeah.
But I mean, this was the late 70s or early 80s, and we were not starving and didn't need to.
And you tasted it. What did it taste like?
I remember tasting sort of like the texture of gelatinous pudding, like something like hard Jello. And what it tasted like, as I remember, this is old memory, but my memory of it, and it could have been, clouded by being a kid, not wanting to eat brain. I mean, kids are not known for their adventurous diets. I mean, mac and cheese, hot dogs, you put hot dogs and to cut them up and to put them together with beans. That's cuisine. That's like 4-star Michelin. And Pizza Square, Elio's, my God, what is this? That's a gift from the gods. But maybe sort of like tofu or like chickpeas, but with less flavor, like like an old chickpea, like very bland. Like it tasted like it didn't taste good. I wouldn't say it tasted bad, but it tasted like nothing. But for a kid, tasting like nothing is bad.
Yeah.
All right. Well, enough about my silly memory. And so, all right. So we move on to Pliny. Everyone's heard of Pliny. There's Pliny the Elder and there's Pliny the Younger. This is just identified as Pliny, so I'm going to assume it's the Elder. In his Naturalis, he associated wolves with eating their own, with human cannibalism. So, I mean, as old as that, and Pliny the Elder was before... What's that? Pompeii. Before Pompeii was destroyed by Vesuvius, this was Pliny the Elder, the Younger, who wrote about it. It's around that time. So figure however long ago that was, that's as early as someone actually put it into writing. And then we get to Ovid's Metamorphosis. And Ovid's Metamorphosis is where we get the story. Whether he invented the story or whether it's something that he's the first one to write down, I don't know. But this is where we meet King Lycaon of Acadia. And by the way, the ancient Greeks didn't call themselves Greeks. They didn't even call them Hellenes or Hellenists. They called themselves Achaeans or Acadians. Like almost like Arcadia without the R. But they call themselves Achaeans because there was an Akkadian in the Near East. Not that they necessarily knew of each other, but they probably did. Anyway, as you pointed out, Zeus visited King Lycaon, and King Lycaon, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, he didn't believe that Zeus was divine. So he denied Zeus's divinity. So as you said, he decided to trick Zeus by killing one of his kids and trying to serve Zeus human flesh. But Zeus riddled that one out because he's Zeus. And, Zeus can't possibly say, listen, I know you're trying to serve me your kid. I mean, you're going to have to live with killing your kid, but I'm not eating that. You're not convinced now. No, Zeus decides that's not enough. He turns him into a wolf. And he just turns him into a wolf. And so he runs off. He's, like Gilgamesh, turns into a wolf, regular wolf, big dog.
Yeah, he kills his other sons too.
Kills his other sons, which is part of the curse. And that's where we get the word lycanthropy, or lycanthropes, which, is associated with, werewolfism. And there's, as you pointed out, there's actually a disease they've adopted the name lycanthropy to use it. But I'm not sure I've forgotten what the roots of the words were. I'm not sure that lycan necessarily means wolf historically, but it sort of come to mean that. Do you remember what the roots of the word are?
I think, wasn't it just from that king? Wasn't that like one of the first ones? And the werewolfism was associated with that because of that king.
I think it was just his name and the thrope. I think thropy, and thrope just means to transform. Anyway, so then we have the warriors most associated with the berserkers. We talked about that, and it's not. But in the Vikings, for example, which by the way, Vikings is another word that has been transformed by historically, Viking is an act. Basically, it's to attack and pillage by sea. The Vikings were many Germanics and Scandinavian peoples, and Scandinavian peoples were often Germanic. But anyway, that's a different subject for a different day, probably covered already. But the bears, wolves, boars. But the warrior respects the human and the beast working in tandem. There's no necessary change of form, But as you pointed out, there can be, whether it's real or imagined. First of all, there's millions of variants where there's both of those when you can change back and forth. Changing back and forth is just as often associated with witchcraft as werewolfism, but there's really no distinction in a lot of that the witch can transform into a wolf, but the witch can also transform into other things as well, which is probably where the vampire transforming into the wolf or controlling wolves came from, just a different form of witchcraft. Again, in literature, especially, and in folklore and legend, depending where you're from, there's really no distinction between any of these things until recently. And probably if you get to the people who tell the original stories or the oral tradition, there still is no real distinction. But there is a story, getting a little bit more modern. People probably heard the tale of Sigmund with Signy, and Signy was being mistreated by Sigmund and his 10 brothers. She married Sigmund. She was punished. And then there was a she-wolf who killed all of Sigmund's 10 brothers. And then when she was killed, it turned out it was it was his mother-in-law, Signy's mother, seeking revenge on the 10 brothers of Sigmund for being so terrible. And, basically, tales of revenge, basically the evil woman, but maybe more important than the evil woman is the human that can control herself in the form of the wolf, using the form of the wolf for a very specific purpose.
Yeah. When you see I feel like in history and in literature, the female wolf or the lady wolf, they aren't really seen as, the victims. They're seen as the seductresses, and they're seen as, purposefully, like the evil ones in the story. And I thought that's interesting. There's really no victim she-wolf that I can recall.
You're right.
Yeah.
Now that I think about it, I can't either. I was busy thinking about, how there's, going back to Lilith, the seductress, the harpies, the sirens, mermaids, you always have the woman that's either the succubus. There's many more succubi than there are incubi. Incubus is more famous now because of the band, but there's always sort of the ghostly demonic woman seducing. Even witches, they would take the form of someone beautiful and seduce a regular person and reveal themselves as a old hag, terrible witch later on. It was too late then. But you're right. If any construct of the sort of the victim woman turning into a she-wolf is rather modern, I imagine. So Norse, actually, wolf is translated, their word is varg. And so, which is sort of interesting because in Greek it's like vera, and vera lycos is sort of the word for werewolves now, and you sort of see language drift there. As an aside, and this is based on nothing, but I was wondering if the word vagrant sort of, which, came from that because verger is the Norse, which, just figure many Germanic languages, means outlaw. And I was wondering if that maybe vagrant came from that as from outlaw, but I don't know. Some things. The Vandals were a Germanic tribe. They sacked Rome famously, and then vandalism has been associated with them ever since. They're not the only ones, but that's the example that comes up. People say, "What are you, a Visigoth?" That to think that that's a barbarian, but barbarian. The word barbarian, what it actually means is not Greek.
Okay.
So you can blame that. Barbarians at the Great Gates just meant not Greeks. Obviously, it means something different now, which is fun because Conan was the barbarian. But if you believe when Conan took place, it was probably before there was anything known as a Greek. Anyway, not important. All right. So word etymology, because that's always fun. So the man wolf, it might be Old English or Old Germanic, and it probably spread to the Celts and the indigenous peoples in Iceland, who were Inuit in most cases. And then, so it could have spread from both East and West when peoples crossed from Asia into North America and then ultimately into South America. But it could have also been spread by Vikings going back and forth to their colonies in Iceland and Greenland and to the east coast of the Americas. Well, North America anyway, in this case. But even in Serbia, I mean, like they have a strange superstition in Serbia that, by the way, I'm going to be talking to someone from Serbia on in Guarded Views about European space law, about Swiss Serbia and the Balkans interests in it. And I've never met anyone from Serbia before, so I'm endlessly fascinated with that. You have?
People, yeah, I've met a whole bunch of Serbians.
Well, you are.
Shout out to my friend Bruno. How are you doing?
Well, you are very worldly. Well, you're. I don't want to give up too much of it, but you're in the DC area, and that is probably the most cosmopolitan, world in the city. If nothing else, for all of the embassies and international organizations that are headquartered there. But good for you. Good for you. Have you ever seen a Serbian film?
What'd you say?
Have you ever seen the movie A Serbian Film?
No, I haven't. But actually, he tried to teach me a couple words in Serbian, but I will not butcher it here today.
Was it Kill the Croatians?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Or Kill the Muslims. I mean,
no.
I'm sorry to all Serbians out there that I know this is they're very 1990s like horrible, jingoistic, stereotypical, horrible, terrible language. I apologize. I apologize to the world. Anyway, their myth is that if you drink water from the footprint, or rather the paw print of a wolf, that would be the cause of werewolfism. I don't know why that would cause the problem necessarily.
Maybe all the bacteria?
I guess. Yeah, I mean, maybe it was just like a tale to keep people from getting like diphtheria or something, or cholera or whatever. In Danish, for a while, only men could become werewolves. But in Russia, there's basically werewolves were created by witches putting their dresses before the threshold of a marital home on a wedding day, which would transform everyone who crossed that threshold into a werewolf, which I guess would start with the bride and groom, but not necessarily limits them. I mean, I don't know much about Russian weddings. If you have a whole lot of people go in there first and set it up, I don't know if it's like, how we saw in various, movies where like crowds of people watch you consummate the first time to make sure it's happening. No idea. But anyway, that's sort of like I don't know exactly what that is. It's
another version of the temptress. We have the woman, she's laying out her dress in front of the marital home, tempting all of those inside to come out and transform into their more animalistic selves. I feel like it's really kind of speaking more to the temptress, she-wolf kind of thing as well.
It could be that. It just seems like it's a parable against marriage. I wonder if someone really studied the specific Russian myths on that, if there was some commonality, if it was someone marrying outside of their clan or their tribe or their religion or
yeah, what makes it, because it can't be every marriage, can it?
I would hope, unless it's just bad luck, unless it's just a true witch story, to explain why some marriages go bad. I mean, it could be as simple as that. Then comes Christianity. And Christianity, it's funny, Christianity sort of like ebbs and flows with the times as to their position on werewolfism and werewolves. So early Christianity just considered pagan and something to deny. Only God can transform, men into beasts, beasts into men, anything to anything. Only God has that kind of power. So this is ridiculous. Deny it. It's heresy. But it seemed to remain a concern, and sort of as almost like a reaction to the church. You sort of got the trope of the sympathetic werewolf in French and Irish and Danish literature. There was a book, I'll call it a book, it's probably a poem called Bis Claret, which I'm sure I'm pronouncing incorrectly, where like there's a wolf terrorizing the community, but the king goes out on the hunt and can kill the wolf, but the wolf seems to basically show that it gives fealty to the king. It genuflects, or not genuflects, it basically bows before the king, showing it's, and so the king spares the wolf, who then joins the king's court as his loyal companion. But every now and then his wolf-like traits come out, and he kills people every now and then as a wolf, and then they end up having to kill him. And it turns out he was a cursed knight, so he was, I guess he was a innocent. He just couldn't control it. He lost that battle. And then you have like the werewolf lovers.
Was this a story of the gentleman who was tricked into being a werewolf by his wife? Is that the same one?
It might be. I'm not sure.
Yeah, like he told his wife that, I turn into a wolf, and if I can't find my clothes, I'll remain a wolf. And she and her lover kind of plotted against him.
Yes, it is.
Steal his clothes, yeah.
Because, yes. You're 100% right, because I remember when they gave him his clothes back, that's when he turned back into a man, into the night. But it was too late. He was already, sanctioned to death.
Yeah.
So a little bit of a tragedy there. Do you remember anything else about that book? Because obviously you remember better than I do.
I remember that he ended up attacking the wife again when he saw her in wolf form.
Oh, sure.
And it ripped off her nose, so she was noseless, and killed the lover. And so he got his revenge, at least before, all the men.
Right. Yeah. Well, as any good tragedy, everybody dies or lives scarred forever. Usually something physically, not just emotionally. Oedipus tears his own eyes out, etc. That's a different show as well. I actually am trying to work on that show as to, Greek tragedy and Greek comedy. I'm not intellectual enough to do that myself. I'm clearly not intellectual enough to do any show myself. That's why I have guests. All right, I'm lazy. So then we have werewolf lovers, sort of symbolic of rapes, and by symbolic meaning like to explain rapes, to as either a warning tale or to explain why otherwise members of society sort of go crazy. And then you also around this time have your skinwalker werewolves, and around the same time, Europe sort of had its Dark Ages, which is sort of a misnomer because we call everything the Dark Ages, but the Dark Ages in Europe weren't that dark. But basically, European pop culture and pop intellectualism sort of unlearned everything that everyone else in the world basically had learned and everything that Europe had learned. And we're still sort of in denial about it with things like the Flat Earth movement and things like that. So sheep, which were already wealth, as we talked about, became wealth again in Europe. They can live anywhere. They can live in most any climate. It gets cold. They grow wool. They're very hardy beasts, but they're also very tasty. And wolves were a threat to those. So, the wolf was already the devil. So, and the sheep was sort of, associated with men, Jesus is the lamb, humans are his flock. So it was sort of like a devil versus God thing, played out, before, humans who of wealth, where they're having the wolves eating the sheep, and that, and that symbology, I guess, was a very simple message to relay to people. But around the 1500s, things changed. It became heretical not to believe in werewolves. And that was partly to justify the witch hunts. So again, witches and werewolves considered the same things. Werewolves were associated with child cannibalism. QAnon. It's the same thing. If you're, drinking kids, eating kids, like with modern demons and the devil. Same thing was going on in the 15th century. And that was considered part of witchcraft. And the two became conflated. Led to, what's up?
The witch hunts and the werewolf hunts.
Absolutely. Yeah, they were same thing. Those witch hunts and the werewolf hunts. And they killed something like 30,000 wolves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know who did the counting there, but this was, part of this was during the various incarnations of the bubonic plague or the Black Death. In 1486, we had two inquisitors, Heinrich Kramer and Johann Springer, who wrote the Malleus Maleficarum, which I think that's the first time I've ever independently pronounced that book correctly, which is basically a witch hunting manual, which can also be said to be a werewolf hunting manual or a vampire hunting manual, because they were all basically the same thing. And what they said is that witches could appear to transform into wolves using a glamour. So anyone who knows vampire, modern lore knows the glamour. It's basically you're hypnotized. And in some cases, that glamour, at least during this era, was aided directly by the devil. So witches, worshiping the devil is old news. Now, we have had many witches on Garden of Doom, and many practitioners of magic, and none of them indicate they worship the devil. In fact, they worship Mother Earth or the earth in general. They're more animistic and whatnot. Wicca is sort of a animistic, a true paganism as opposed to worshiping a demonic goat. But these stigmas remain. And the devil himself could appear as a wolf. Yeah.
But you know what I find interesting about that book, the kind of like witch hunter's guide to revealing a witch, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's been a while since I heard this story, so it might be one or two things that get a little muddled. But apparently, the one of the gentlemen, he wrote that because either a woman it was either his ex or a woman who kept repeatedly turning him down. He accused her of being a witch, right? And it went to trial and everything, and I believe she was found, the case was thrown out because they couldn't determine, okay, well, how can we actually test if she's a witch or not? So the case was thrown out. And it was because he became so angry that the case was thrown out, and for that, he created this whole guidebook of how to actually identify a witch. So it couldn't happen.
Wow. I guess everyone needs to find their muse somewhere. That's a very spiteful man. I mean, I don't know. It always seems like it's these, Ken Starr types,
He was so angry, man. He said, never again.
I already mentioned the bubonic plague and the association with werewolves and the wolf hunts. There's something called, this is distinctly French, and it's the loup-garou, which exists also in the shows I've done on voodoo. The loup-garou still exists in New Orleans and Bayou lore. And though they don't say it's exactly a werewolf, they don't say it's exactly not, but it is men who are destined to become wolves with the full moon. That was not always the thing, the full moon. The full moon is relatively new. So let's just say within the last 500 or 600 years, or at least popularized. And then you had, of course, the French colonizers who, came to the New World, and they encountered similar myths from the indigenous peoples, in the Caribbean, the Gulf. The French were in Canada, and then northern United States, but ultimately a lot of Louisiana, and basically west of the 13 colonies, and then south of the 13 colonies was more Spain. But they encountered similar myths of werewolfism, and since it was already stigmatized as devilish and evil and heresy, that became part of the justification for the terrible treatment and even killing of indigenous people, basically as demons or infected by demonism. And every mass murder seems to require some sort of moral justification that people can hide behind. It's a different sort of disguise, I suppose, a psychological disguise. Then there's the case of Peter Stube, who's probably around the same year, probably in the last 400 years. So he's basically a serial killer. He might be the first confirmed serial killer that's not like a king or a warrior or something like that. Probably if people look harder, they can find others. There's probably some in Greek myths or whatever the case may be. But basically, when he was finally caught, his story is that he made a deal with the devil 25 years prior, and that that's what allowed him to escape capture for a quarter of a century, which, by the way, since the average lifespan was around 40 years back then, that was a long time. But there's everything in this story. He engaged in cannibalism. He engaged in bestiality. He engaged in incest. He killed his wife. It's like his second wife, his girlfriend or his mistress, and like her child was involved in his. It was sort of like Manson-esque almost, like it was like, incest or incest one part removed, and like killing everyone. And the Case of Peter Stew became a very popular book in 15th century England. So I guess 15th century is so I guess it's more like within the last 600 years, not 500 years. I always get that century thing that you have to go back the number before. And then, as you pointed out, lycanthropy is an actual disease. It's a rare psychosis where humans believe they are transforming into a non-human animal. It doesn't have to be a wolf, but, anything. For a while, people associated with werewolfism with drug-induced hallucinations, either involuntarily or voluntarily. I mean, a lot of shamans, do use drugs, natural, ayahuasca is pretty famous. LSD is sort of pretty popular. And they might have seen, a lot of people associate certain hallucinogens with spiritualism and reaching other planes of understanding, or, talking to certain divine or superior beings, or maybe imagining yourself as one. I don't know. I mean, it seems to, I'm sure there are elements of it, especially in religious rituals, but I don't think this is what universally explains werewolfism. There's also something called ergo poisoning, which people blamed on it. Apparently it can cause hallucinations, and like there's common foods and roots that people could have eaten during the time that might cause it, but apparently they're not that easy to digest, and it would take large amounts to do it, and you would probably throw up or get violently ill before you get the hallucination. So that's was sort of set aside. There's also something called Ambrose syndrome, AMBROS, which exists, which is extreme hair growth all over the entire body. And there are some paintings of it. And if you look at the paintings, they actually look a lot like the 1930s and 40s Wolfman movies.
Yeah, I wonder if that's where they got most of their inspiration from, at least visually.
I would, yeah. So I've never seen anyone like that, and I hope that there's a way to treat it, a cure it. I didn't read about it. I guess I didn't go that far because it wasn't directly related to what I was looking into. I don't know have you run into any treatment or cure?
No, I never looked into it, but I would assume they have some sort of, blockages or, some sort of, there has to be a medication for it nowadays, I'm sure.
I would hope so. This is another silly, usually aesthetics is not covered under insurance, but if you have something like, breast cancer and you have a mastectomy, giving you an artificial breast is covered by, if you break your nose, a nose job is covered under insurance. I wonder if something that extreme, like laser hair removal, would be covered under insurance.
I would assume so, at least some sort of medication. I'm sure there's some sort of medication for it that's going to block any kind of like excessive hair growth. I would assume at this point, it's 2024, if there isn't, doctors get on it.
Yeah,
you have to.
I would think so. I mean, someone like that's going to have a hard time becoming a productive member of society.
Yeah,
and the depression and the isolation they would feel. I mean, listen, I'm not saying I'm any better. I probably wouldn't, want to go to the bars with that guy either. This is not Teen Wolf where it's all fun and games. But I don't know, things come.
I'm sure it's even worse for the women. Imagine being a woman with that. Golly.
I can't even imagine being a woman. Period. I mean. Boys rule, girls drool. I'm 100% on that already. But yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's bad enough. I mean, the bearded women, like women with like mustaches and facial hair. I mean, that's got to be tough too. Right? I mean, I mean, again, boys rule, girls drool. So there's also a disease that was discovered in the 20th century called porphyria, which is severe photosensitivity, which results in hyperpigmentation, excessive hair growth, nocturnal wanderings, and reddish brownish teeth. So, I mean,
Sounds like everybody I work with.
Hopefully none of them listening to the show. Or I'll have to edit this out. And since I don't do the editing here because I'm too stupid to figure it out, it probably wouldn't be edited out. So you're doomed if you get your coworkers to listen to it.
It was a joke.
Oh, okay. All right. So you don't live with the Morlocks then, or work with the Morlocks?
No.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, I just can't imagine that these two rare diseases, spawn this entire thing that's lasted for thousands of years in human psyche. I think that, I'm sure it didn't help any. It probably, became the confirmation bias when you actually saw this in action. And then, of course, there's rabies, which is the crazed and frenzied behavior. It's a virus that attacks the brain. It can be fatal, both in animals and humans. But I think that that's on the fringes, sort of, again, more of a confirmation bias thing than actual cause. What nobody mentioned was the curious case of Dr. Jekyll. As most people say, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I feel like that was a werewolf story.
I think it could be argued, definitely, like the victim, right? He or at least would he be the damned? I would say the victim, because he had a mental illness, possibly, that made him believe something other than what he was.
Well, we don't know exactly. It's actually a very short book, but basically he was a scientist. He was Dr. Jekyll, and he made a potion, an elixir, to make him feel strong. Like he was, all of these scientists in these books are always rich nobility, and that's because nobody else had time to do what they were doing. Everyone else is just trying to eke out a living and, do whatever they do for their feudal lord or whatever. And, caring for their 6 kids, knowing that only 2 of them are going to make it past 16. So only the landed gentry could do all this stuff. So that, that's why in the books like Dracula and Jekyll and Hyde and Frankenstein and Lovecraft, it's always these, wealthy professors, and, even the constables are from from the nobility. The knights, it wasn't a job. It was the duty of the nobility to do the fighting in olden times. So anyway, I think that, he did an elixir to I guess to make him more virile, and it and turned him into basically the primordial man, the beast man, which, and basically a serial killer. Basically, he became Jack the Ripper, but when it wore off, he was back to humble Dr. Jekyll, member of society. And he basically, the whole book is that he has a dinner party where he then tells a story to other natural philosophers, and, which are their word for scientists back then. And, none of them believe him, really. So whether it actually happened or not, I don't remember, because it's been a while since I visited the book. So I don't remember if there were actually reports, police officers were confirming that there were killings, missing people, dead prostitutes, whatever. But I think there were. I don't think it was imagination. Now, maybe the elixir part was his justification. It was mental illness. So I don't know, but it was definitely the dual nature of man, which, to me, when you become all hairy and muscled, that's sort of a werewolf.
I've never read the book, right? But I'm wondering, did he remember at all when he turned into?
Oh yeah.
What?
He remembered almost all of it. At least the story. Most of the book is his retelling what happened to him on over the course of. It wasn't a long span of time. I mean, it might have been 6 days or something like that. The book. All of physically, like if it was a play, it would be in one room, his dining room, basically, or the waiting room and the doorway when his, servants would answer the door for his guests. But most of the book is him telling the story with, I guess it'd be flashbacks. It's a short, it's short. It's like maybe 150 pages.
Okay.
And it's not that great.
There's been this thing with werewolves and how sometimes, depending on what story, they either remember what they do as a werewolf, or they don't remember what they do as a werewolf.
Right.
And I think that's interesting too, because it's mostly with, the worst acts of being a werewolf. It's like when you're out there murdering and raping, if you will. That's the ones that's, it takes over, and I can't recall, and they lose their memory of that. And it's interesting because it parallels what people say happens when they are in this bit of passion or rage, and they go into this murdering spree. This is what they say. Yeah, oh yeah, I was just so enraged that I don't remember what happened. I just, remember waking up with the knife or waking up with the gun and something happened. So it's like, okay, this is, I don't know, I just feel like it's interesting how they try to, or at least how history kind of puts these narratives into these stories of werewolves and things like that.
Yeah, I think in legal terms, it's probably somewhere on the spectrum, starting with manslaughter or involuntary homicide, down to non compos mentis. You're not mentally capable of being held for trial, but you go into an institution. That frenzy, can't control yourself. So modern werewolves, became more popular, obviously with the printing press and with there being things like books being more available, and then things like movies and plays became more widely available. The werewolf sort of shifted from something that people believed in and were afraid of to mostly a fictional character, sort of during the Industrial Revolution. They sort of popularized, probably most notably in the early 1800s by the Brothers Grimm. Yes, I know the Industrial Revolution really started about a few decades after that, but like in their book, or at least one of their stories, there was a belt that transformed a man into a wolf, which, that sort of goes back a little bit to, at least the Green Knight story, though, in Arthurian, but that just made you invulnerable. So that's sort of a different take. There was a book called the Albigeneses, which is interesting because the all right, help me say this. The Albigensians were French nobility in the south of France, who are, in some lore, are considered the descendants of and protected by Cathars and Templars, associated with Cathars and Templars, but mostly where people think that Jesus might have gone, or Mary and the line of Jesus might have gone in southern France, and there was actually you might hear the oh God, I can't say the word. It's just whatever I said before. But there was actually a crusade. Some people call it the Merovingian Crusades because they were the family in charge. But it was basically a crusade that the Pope ordered, the French Pope, against the Southern French. So during the other crusades, when the Europeans were mostly losing, the French were so concerned with what was going on south of France, mostly because there were a lot of rich people there, that they actually declared a crusade on this sect. People, again, that there's been a lot of mythos with Templars and the bloodline Jesus there. Anyone who read the Da Vinci Code is probably somewhat familiar with that. Anyway, in this book, the Albigenses, which probably wasn't named that by accident, it's probably somehow related to that, where someone wakes from a dream and apparently was attacked by a fangless werewolf, which is a little bit strange.
Yeah. Maybe they were scratched. They were scratched by him.
Right. Yeah. They were gummed, and it was very unpleasant. Sounds like they're attacked by like a old crazy lady. But that was a popular book then. And then in Penny Dreadful, the pulp fiction, probably most people know from the TV show with the guy from Oppenheimer. What's his name? Cillian Murphy.
I know Josh Hartnett was in it, and I know Timothy Dalton was in it. I am in love with Timothy Dalton.
Well, couple confessions. I've never seen Penny Dreadful, never read Penny Dreadful, and I still haven't seen Oppenheimer, even though it's on Peacock. Now, by the time this show drops, I'm sure I will have seen Oppenheimer because I have Peacock. But at the time of recording this, which is February, the 18th? I haven't seen Oppenheimer yet. So there you go. So they had a recurring werewolf named Wagner, which it's spelled Wagner, but it's pronounced Wagner. And this was in 1847. And this was a werewolf who, was sort of likened to eternal youth. And he made what I wrote down as a Faustian bargain, only to learn that, he actually made the bargain with John Faust. So it wasn't just it wasn't just like a Faustian bargain. It was a Faustian bargain. And it was a wealthy old man. And yes, he became virile and young and handsome and strong, but he turned into a wolf once a month. So that was the price that poor Wagner paid for his eternal youth, was that he was a rampaging wolf once a month. We've already talked about there are were-tigers, were-hyenas, around the world. Actually,
were-bears.
Were-bears. And we've had people on Garden of Doom talking about mythology and lore and legends from Africa and different parts of India, and covered all of those things probably more than once. But there was a time where there was the seductive female white she-wolf. And I don't know what that was about. I mean, white fur, I assume since this was Europe, it was probably white skin also, but white furred animals or white animals generally are like this, the sacred white deer in Native American, of course, Moby Dick, there's the white buffalo, there's white lions, there's legends of like white animals everywhere, and they exist. There's albino animals all the time, and white leopards. But I don't know, the way they were describing the seductive female white she-wolf, all I heard in my head was the song Hot Child in the City by Nick Gilder. So I sort of lost everything else on the white she-wolves because I'm busy. It's like singing this 1979 song in my head.
Okay. Well, I think it's interesting that it is always the white she-wolf with the white fur. You do see that often when they talk about she-wolves. And I think it's, again, about how women are portrayed in these stories. It's either you're the virgin, the virgin adorned in white, or you're the seductress, or you're either like the old hag. You're one of the three. And I think that they likened these she-wolves with, white fur in order to kind of assist them with their seduction, because when they're first going after their victim, they have to take on this kind of air of, this is the woman, you have to be seen as someone desirable, and people desire the virginal trope in these stories, the virginal woman. So I'm thinking that's probably some of it as well. They wanted to kind of set the trap, kind of like Edward, how he said his skin was glittering to attract the victim, but at the end of the day, they're dangerous. So maybe that's something to do with it.
I also think it's the flagrancy. Because unless you're a polar bear, or like a whale in the Arctic, like white isn't really a color that is evolutionarily, going to be picked by natural selection, or a bird like a seagull or something like that, because you look up in the sky and it blends back. So, most fur, is camouflage, for animals, but white wouldn't be. I mean, maybe in the Russian winter or whatever, but most places. But this is France, England, whatever. This is all over. So I think it's the flagrancy. They're not trying to hide it. It's almost like the harlot. How there was a. It still happens, but it's like victim blaming. Basically, what was that woman thinking wearing that? She was asking for trouble. Yeah, the seductress, basically, wearing the corset with their bosoms pushed up, and a dress that didn't cover her knees, or ankles, or whatever. I think the white fur has something to do with the flagrancy as well as what you're talking about, like false purity, with that, with the white. So interesting there. But always supernaturally demonic woman. Then there was in 1899 we have someone named Bagot, who wrote a Roman mystery where it reverted back to males being the werewolves and attacking helpless women. So I guess chivalry came back in a sexist kind of way.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I don't know. And then you sort of skip ahead to like movies. Yeah, in 1913 there was The Werewolf, which was a silent film where it was most people look at it as being pretty racist, but basically. Navajo women married a white man that, created a whole, series of bad events where, someone became a werewolf and everything went all wrong. 1914, there's a book called The White Wolf, which again had indigenous people portrayed as monstrous beasts, and sort of like this parallels. These are mostly U.S. films, and this parallels sort of like U.S. policies of sort of reneging on treaties and agreements with Native American tribes and taking lands and things like that. So sort of dehumanizing them, othering them.
Propaganda films.
That's the perfect word, propaganda. Then you get to, in 1925, a movie called Wolf Blood, which I like that name, which is a white man who turns into a wolf due to a lupine blood transfusion. So then we get, a different way, other than a curse. It's so I guess he's sort of the innocent in that. And that led to a monster explosion in cinema, which included the Wolf Man, which everyone remembers the Wolf Man, which was, but, I didn't realize this, but one of the videos I watched for this did explain, and they had a grad student on filmography and film history saying that basically Lon Chaney's journey mirrored the travels of the Allied troops across Europe during World War II, encountering the Germans. So while Lon Chaney was, I guess, the hero of the werewolf, he was like, as he moved, it was sort of the, he was always one step ahead until the end. I think his own father killed him in that movie. I'm not sure if that's the right movie, but it was, again, sort of like subtle propaganda, or maybe just accidental, but they said, this person said it was exactly mirroring their travel. So I didn't, cross-reference that. But in that movie, the cause was a bite, and the transformation again was during a full moon, which that sort of lasted with us, because that's, sort of the seminal movie. There's often a hint of tragedy in the deaths. We've noted that before, even going way back, that there was a hint of tragedy. There's a reason why when you think tragedy, you probably put the word Greek in front of it when you're talking about literature anyway. And you had likable humans who were changed due to no fault of their own into this hideous, monster. And sometimes they were able to struggle with it, but usually either people couldn't see that they were struggling because they could only see a monster, or they lost in the struggle, sort of like, they embraced their Mr. Hyde. Jeff Theory. Give me my PhD. Give me many PhDs. And like I said, a couple of movies like Relatives, like it was like the father would kill them, or their doctor killed them, or whatever, something like that. The Nazis used werewolves and wolf themes for all sorts. They named units after wolves and werewolves. They named operations after werewolves and things. They used it for recruiting films. I mean, they like any way you could use the werewolf. The Nazi used it, and that ties directly. I mean, Hitler sort of was famously obsessed with the occult, and at least one of his lieutenants was as well, and they went to Antarctica and all sorts of things. I mean, basically spawning, aside from A World of Evil, every Indiana Jones movie. I mean, don't they all like sort of involve Nazis looking for something?
Yeah, that's right.
When they ran out of Nazis, it was Russians being led by Nazis, old Nazis. I mean, anyway, then we had the nuclear experiment age, so the nuclear age. Then we had, of course, a werewolf created by nuclear poisoning, by radiation poisoning, sort of like a small Godzilla. And then we had the teeny boppers, when, sort of like Elvis and the Beatles became popular. You had a little bit after James Dean, you had I Was a Teenage Werewolf, leading up to, 25 years later, Teen Wolf and all the Teen Wolf movies. And then, and really the only thing I want to get to, which is my favorite modern-ish werewolf movie, Gingersnaps, which is where werewolfism was a sexually transmitted condition, and it arrived with puberty and menstrual cycles, which, sort of was like a moon cycle, but not following the moon exactly. And except for the end, I thought Gingersnaps was a fabulous movie. I watched both the sequels later. The one is a true sequel. The other is supposed to be a prequel. Neither one lives up to it, but I will say that the sequel, Gingersnaps Unleashed, has a very young Tatiana Maslany from Orphan Black and She-Hulk in it, and she steals the movie. And while it's not a great movie, I think the end sort of makes it worth it. It's not quite Usual Suspects, where it was, which was not a great movie, but the end made it great. But it was a good movie until the end, when it became great. Memento as well, in that this is not up to that, but it's similar. So I would skip the prequel one where they're like, in like some sort of French lumber camp in, colonial Canada. Then we had also around this time, meaning back to the 80s, this time, prior to Teen Wolf, you have probably two of the most famous werewolf movies of the modern era, anyway, The Howling, which was telling us that no place is safe. And we had that in horror movies, a lot of suburban horror movies. Well, The Howling was, where everybody in this affluent private community was a werewolf or becoming a werewolf. It was a werewolf colony in where you thought you were safe, this rich, gated community, and basically telling us no place is safe. So, sort of like a lot of Freddy Krueger, and, Jason was at a summer camp. I mean, poor people don't go to sleepaway camp. It's part of the no place is safe obsession of the 80s. But it was a whole werewolf colony, and sort of the concept of the werewolf pack really wasn't a thing until The Howling. Or at least not popularized, even though wolves, always, or mostly are in packs. I mean, there's a reason lone wolf is unusual, because it's a lone wolf. That's not the norm. Then, of course, American Werewolf in London. Both Howling and American Werewolf in London came out in like 1981 or 82.
I think I've seen that. It was either American Werewolf in London or Paris. Was there one in Paris?
There was.
Okay, I think I kind of vaguely remember that one as well.
Well, you should see American Werewolf in London, and you should watch The Howling. I'm not so sure about the sequels. I think some of the sequels were okay, some of them were terrible, but The Howling itself was great. I think Dee Wallace is in it, and I think she was the mom in E.T. I could be wrong, but if I'm wrong, it's someone who looks like her. Maybe it's Marky Post. I always got those two confused. Anyway, American Werewolf in London, it was a demonic cause, and of course there were Nazis involved also. I mean, he would have dreams with Nazis as werewolves. So, but this was like the famous practical effects where you actually saw the transformation and felt the pain and agony of like bones cracking and snouts extending and all sorts of cool stuff like that. But werewolves have always sort of been associated with many real world problems. I have a big question mark next to Beauty and the Beast, both the movie, the Disney version and the TV show with Ron Perlman, and I think it was Linda Hamilton. I know the Beast wasn't exactly a werewolf. He was more like a lion man, but, I think it was trying to get to the sympathetic, monster again.
Yeah. I know in the books, he looked a little different than in the movie. He had like a tusk and it looked more like elephant, like a furry elephant kind of thing. And then they kind of reimagined his look for all the furries out there in the Disney movie version.
Yeah, the cartoonish Beast actually was really impressive looking, but yeah, it was like part bull, part boar with those big tusks coming from his lower jaw.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a scary looking guy. Of course, he dressed really well, and I think it was always, to find true love, you must look at the heart and not at the outside.
Yeah.
Of course, while you're looking at the heart, I mean, he is in a noble house and, outlanded gentry. So it's like, I'm not sure if there probably is somewhere where you have to look at someone's heart and they're also like horribly poor, Because
not in fairy tales. You're always rich. Right? You're always rich and handsome eventually.
I mean, we basically have real world equivalents in gold diggers. I mean, you always see like the young, hot thing, male or female, with like the much older person, and like it's like, nobody's surprised. Which one is it? De Niro or Pacino? Like one of them just became a father. He's like 84 and like.
I think it's both of them. They both recently had kids.
Mazel tov, guys. I mean, meanwhile, Anna Nicole Smith got demonized for basically, trying the same thing, and probably rightly so, but no more than they should be demonized. I mean, I guess the issue is consent versus diminished capacity, but I mean, I'm not sure the old guy didn't benefit in his own ways from, hanging around with Anna Nicole Smith. Who's the lawyer from Erin Brockovich? Tom Girardi. He was married to Erica Jane. Well, I think they're still married because I think he's deemed incompetent of, I guess it turns out he like stole millions of dollars from his law firm's escrow account and.
Oh, okay.
or those are the allegations anyway. And anyway, watch The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. It's amazing satire, while in some way it's real at the same time. But that sort of.
Would you consider beast a were animal, at least, from being a beast?
Yeah, I think he is. I think this is the.
Well, I guess there's a transformation from human to beast. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think that he's the cursed, the damned, that he was a righteous person. That, listen, I don't really remember it. I saw the movie, obviously the cartoon. I saw the play. The play was the exact same thing as the cartoon. So all I remember is thinking, why the hell am I going to Broadway to see the same thing as the cartoon movie? I could have just stayed home and watched the movie. So I don't remember what his origin story was, but I know.
I want to say it's the victim though, because he was transformed by a witch, or like an evil, like fairy witch lady.
Yeah, that's what I thought. And also the show with Ron Perlman. I mean, I think that he too, was more of a lion man, but they had their, it was almost like, it was like a Cyrano thing where they had their like forbidden love thing, but he had the heart of gold, sort of like the man is the beast is sort of like the male equivalent of the hooker with heart of gold trope, in movies. Yeah. So yeah, I think he's sort of a were creature, not exactly a werewolf, but I think that was probably a conscious decision that they didn't want him to be a werewolf. But if you made him a werewolf, I mean, that story was already done. But I think it's the same thing.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that.
Just not as prevalent, whether it's a lion or some sort of chimera creature. I mean, you obviously don't. I mean, most of us don't encounter lions in nature. Most of us don't encounter wolves, but it's not that hard to imagine doing it. I mean, anyone who's ever been camping, if you're not a little bit afraid of running into a wolf or a bear, you're probably lying, or you're really a very experienced camper. But like, I don't think any of us think it's impossible to see wolves. Like, I see foxes 5 times a week. I've seen coyotes. I mean, it's I'm not exactly like Bear Grylls or some, Grizzly Adams or some outdoorsman. But seeing a lion in the wild, I mean, the only way I could possibly imagine that would be going on a safari.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's definitely a reality of the proximity of the terror, the scary thing is different in degree. And, I think that's always been the human condition. You try to explain the things that are close to you, and those are more perennial than the things that aren't. Like, maybe like an elephant monster would be cool in the United States, but I don't think it would be last as something that people would actually be afraid of, because there aren't a lot of elephants running around here. But if you had like a crazy cow, maybe. Mm-hmm. That'd be a pretty cool horror movie. You have like
the mad cow.
The mad cow. Cow secretly discovers sentience and stomps people to death. And then when you're looking for it, it's like a herd of cows. They're all white clouds with those black spots. And you no matter what, you can't determine. You don't have horseshoes, so there's no hoof. There's no fingerprints on hoofs.
So you drink out of the hoof. You become a werecow.
Ooh, so you spread the werecow. Maybe there are werecows among us. Maybe every serial killer is actually a werecow. So you see that, folks? You listen to the Garden of Doom, you spawn an entire new version of horror. So I don't think I have anything else of any constructive nature to put to the show on werewolves. I think we covered it sort of from prehistory through current. Do you have anything that you feel that we didn't cover that you want to add?
I just have a question, and before I ask the question, I wanted to kind of set the stage a little bit.
Sure.
So, as we mentioned before, werewolves have kind of gone in and out of popularity, and so much so that vampires have kind of like superseded that popularity of a werewolf. And I'm not sure if it was before the show or during the show that I asked, why do you think that vampires have become so popular as opposed to werewolves, even though werewolves are much older in literature. Like we've had more stories of werewolves further back than we've had of vampires. So I wanted to ask you, why do you think that is? How is it that the vampires has kind of superseded werewolves in popularity?
Well, the reason I think what I think is a lot due to you. And you're educating me on the literature history of the vampire and then me following up on it and basically confirming everything that you said. The vampire evolved from being basically indistinguishable from, any sort of blood-sucking, flesh-eating monster, be it witch, zombie, werewolf, any sort of, I'm going to say revenant, ghoul, anything could be attributed to a vampire, but, really wasn't, including like basically big mosquitoes that basically were, justifications for malaria or explanations of malaria or, giant ticks or whatever, into evolving into sort of these Gothic landed gentry sort of European nobility types, from, and having a certain amount of sex appeal, whether it was honestly or whether it was through the glamour or some combination of those along with the wealth, because they all had the wealth. Probably some of it due to the immortality, but it seems like most of them did come from landed gentry, old noble families. I mean, the House of the Dragon, Dracula, was a ruling family for a long time, and that sort of kept up. So you had all those things, but they were always humans. They were always humanoid, and could present as humans, whether, older and, obviously the more blood they drank, they often became younger. But they became sort of human, sort of like your embodiment of the Mr. Hyde, but they could retain the elegance of the Dr. Jekyll, and they had complete control over it. So it was sort of the bad boy and the dream guy all wrapped up in one. Yeah. And so I think it was like sort of that fantasy, combined with immortality. So I think that is more relatable. That is closer to God or the devil, for us to visualize. And, and then I think the same things happen with the devil. The devil's gone from snakes and dragons and this and that to, the show Lucifer, where he's basically, a handsome guy, basically misunderstood. So I think it's just as simple as that some writers made it like Gothic. Even the first book you told me he was an escaped slave, but then he became noble. He used his his powers for first for revenge, of course, but also made himself wealthy and sexy.
I agree. That's what I was thinking about. Like, why is it that they kind of surpassed the werewolf? And I think again it's because with vampires, by the time that people were writing about vampires, they had already kind of transformed themselves into slightly sexy monsters, right? All the oral stories of vampires before, when they were kind of like, more creepy and dangerous and undesirable, were kind of like oral stories. So by the time they were written down and kind of popularized by books, they were already sexy. Whereas the werewolf, for most of its written history, at least, has been the victim, like you mentioned, and no one kind of really wants to associate with victimhood or being, crazy, the damned. So I think that kind of helped with their the popularity of the vampires perceiving as werewolf, because you want to associate with the glamorous, not so much with the victims. So, but there is a second part to my question.
Well, there's a second part to my answer, so let me do that because I lose my thoughts. I think part of the discussion about the beast might have been an effort to turn a werewolf into something, or a were-creature into something more glamorous, like the Gothic vampire of modernity. There's only so many things you can do with a wolf before it becomes something that's not a wolf. It becomes a chimera, it becomes a griffin, it becomes some sort of other mythological creature. If you give it wings or a different kind of tail or whatever, it becomes a different mythology. But I also think that lately, and probably with the popularity of things like The Walking Dead, that vampires have reverted, at least half the time, into something more bestial, something more unthinking. They have viruses, sometimes they're led by one conscious leader, the master or the progenitor or the old one.
Okay.
But but I think there is some regression of the vampire, but it does live parallel with the thinking vampire or the sexy vampire. In Underworld, I think they tried to do that with werewolves too, but they didn't really get anywhere with the story. I don't think that's because they tried to make werewolves closer to humans and vampires. I just think that they got bad at writing stories, and maybe Kate Beckinsale aged, and they sort of gave up. But I think there's been attempts. It's just, I think to an extent people like what they like, maybe because they can relate to certain things. And if you're going to do some sort of paradigm shift, you have to do something huge like Inception or Interstellar, not to be all about Christopher Nolan right now, but or The Matrix. These are movies that completely change, movie genres and with mass appeal. So I don't know. So, but what's the second question?
The second part of the question is with werewolves, they're kind of portrayed a couple different ways. They're either, like we mentioned before, you can either be a werewolf where you look completely indistinguishable from the actual wolf. Then we have the kind of more monster-looking versions, kind of like that of Underworld, where you're kind of, this huge half beast, not even half beast, some human traits, some beast traits. And then there's the version that's kind of like Stephanie Meyer's version, where you're just like this huge wolf, almost the size of a bear type of animal, right? So my question to you is, if you were transformed into a werewolf, which one would you want to be? And which one's your favorite?
I would want to be the most powerful one that can keep the most of my senses. Now, whether that means that my morality gets tossed out, I don't care, as long as I'm still guiding it. Like if I'm going to be, I'm okay with being full on monster, but I want to know what I'm doing, remember it, and think about it and relish in my super. Like if I'm going to be, the wolf version of Lex Luthor or Ultron, I want to retain the memory of it and relish in my limitless power. I want to be Emperor Palpatine. I don't want to forget it. So whichever version is the biggest, the baddest, and the strongest doesn't have to be tied to size. It can be due to preternatural or supernatural abilities, but I also want to be able to preserve the memory and have some element of control, even if that element of control acknowledges the complete losing of control during the violence.
Okay. All right.
So I'd rather be Grey Hulk than Hulk, but I think I'd rather be something in between, because let's face it, nobody likes Grey Hulk.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think he's very popular.
Maybe like Abomination. Maybe I want to be like Abomination, closer to Hulk's strength, has some recollection of it, but bad.
Mm-hmm. Okay, all right, interesting.
More Sabretooth than Wolverine.
Okay, got it.
But I'll take Wolverine. Too. But yeah. So I don't know. I've never read any of the Stephanie Meyer's books, and I've never seen any of the movies in the entirety, and certainly not all of them. You have to remember, I'm a lot older than you, and when those things were popular, my kids either didn't exist or they were really, really young, so that wasn't for them. My ex-wife, so my wife at the time, read them and watched them, so they're probably on the background, but I didn't. And actually, I remember reading The Hunger Games around at the same time, and I'm like, I already know what's going to happen in this. She's like, well, you don't. And I'm like halfway through the first book, and I said, well, this is how this is it's going to lead to revolt, and they're all going to, they're all going to rally around this girl, and and this is going to happen. And she's like, you're right, you don't have to read the rest of the series. I'm like, I'm going to, because this, I'm not saying these are good books, and yeah, they're predictable, but it's like literal popcorn. It's delicious. It's empty calories, but it's delicious. It's like an ultimate beach or swimming pool book. So damn, I'm going to read the books. They're easy, no problem. I don't always need to be reading like William Gibson or something that sometimes makes my head hurt, but it's worth it at the end. Anyway, so yeah, I got you. I guess you got the taste of what kind of monster I'd be. So yeah, I'm going to ask you the same question. Which one would you be? You don't get to just ask me that question. You almost got away with it, by the way.
See, there's two versions of myself that are at war with this, right?
That's like the beginning of a show. Between all of us, there is a battle between good and evil.
Yeah,
we understand.
A part of me, the more cowardice, I would say, of me will say, okay, well, I want to be the first one because if, S hits the fan, if I transform into a regular looking wolf, no one will be the wiser. Like, I can live my life and kind of, pretty much live a pretty normal life.
The were-cow disguise.
Yeah, the were-cow disguise. I'm looking like a regular wolf. No one would tell the difference.
You live in DC. There's no wolves. You're better off with the cow.
But people will say, okay, well, this is like a husky dog. It's just a big dog,
Okay.
But if the other part of me, I want to be like the underworld werewolves, where I'm just like super jacked and like powerful, and clearly if you see that, you're going to know something's up, right? You're going to know this is a monster,
right?
And you're less likely to live to an old age if that's the kind of werewolf you are,
right? And you've got your pack, and you want to be the sexy werewolf. So basically, you want to be the vampire equivalent of the werewolf.
It's like, I'm not sure. It's like I could go either one I would take.
You either want to go complete state of nature, regular wolf, where you can hide amongst your peers. Let's just put you into Yellowstone or Minnesota, whatever, where there's gray wolves, where you could hide there. Or you want to be like gothic, full on. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. Well, I'm singular. Obviously, you have more of a dual nature. I'm probably full of shit, by the way. I mean, if push came to shove, I'd probably do nothing. I'd probably, as jacked as I was as a werewolf, I probably would lie on my ass. I would probably eat McDonald's. I'd probably watch TV and become a giant Buddha fat werewolf is what would probably happen. But don't tell anyone, okay? So, this is private, just between us. All right, Cee. First of all, brilliant as always. Great to see you cyberways. Last time I saw you was in person. That was great. Also, by the way, she's tall. She's like as tall as I am. Now I'm not super tall, but I'm not sure. I'm 5'10" even, which is slightly above average for a dude. And she's every bit as And for those of you that know, she's got a lot of hair. Now, she often doesn't put it up. She normally puts it up. But if she chose to put it up, I mean, in any way, shape, or form, like, she could easily, have several inches on me. And
I'm really a werewolf, guys. Don't tell anyone.
Yeah, but you didn't tell us which kind. So, yeah. That's right. So the white fur is a possibility.
Yeah.
So you're saying there's a chance. All right, well,
thank you for having me. It's been great, talking werewolves with you.
I know. I can't wait to figure out what our next topic is going to be. Now, other than Unpopular Review, or including Unpopular Review, where can people find you, follow you, support you? I know you do a million things, so.
So, if you are on Instagram, I'm Cee the Superior on Instagram. I'm Cee the Superior on TikTok. I'm Cee the Superior on YouTube. So, all across the board, Cee the Superior. Check out my channel. And I do book and movie reviews on Unpopular Review. So if that's your thing, check out Unpopular Review Entertainment on YouTube. And if you like wrestling, check out Unpopular Review Wrestling.
I'm trying to lobby, by the way, to be part of the Unpopular Review Entertainment Group to review the X-Men 97 series. Okay. Now, I don't know if Unpopular Review is committed to reviewing that show, but it seems like it'd be something that's badly with. By the way, Cee's also big in anime and comic books and things like that. So video games, all sorts of pop culture, all the stuff that the people younger than me, frankly, the people my age too, but people my age and younger like. But she's actually young. I'm not going to say how old you are. I don't even know, but it's at least 2 generations thereabouts younger than me. So she could be my daughter. But she's not. You can tell because she likes me. Anyway, enough. Thank you for being on Garden of Doom. Follow Cee. Follow Unpopular Review. If you're going to follow Unpopular Review, follow both Wrestling and Entertainment on YouTube. We really like that. But follow us anywhere. Turn on those notifications and, give us likes here. Give us likes there. Give Garden of Doom a rating, 5-star, and a nice review. And tell your friends. It's more important than anything else. Okay, we're going to see you again, and we're going to you'll hear from us, next week in the Garden of Doom, and possibly midweek with Garden Views. You never know. So, but you do know with Garden of Doom, you're always going to get a show every week. All right, folks, thanks for listening. Bye.
I can feel you, I can hear you howling in my bones, and there's an evil lurking in the dark. Ever-shifting skin is ripping as you take control. I can't tell where you end and where I start. A ferocious dire alive. 'Cause it's fight or fright in the full moonlight. You can run but you can't hide. I can be honest, I can be human, I can become the silver bullet in your head. But no one can break my heart like I can. Werewolf. From the bite marks ever bitter sweet. Smile for the camera, but don't flash your teeth. Let the bodies hit the dance floor to this heartbreak beat. I feel like somebody's watching me. Feels like everybody's watching me.